Deep in the mountains, beneath a quiet full moon, a wolf's howl drifts through the night air. It is not a cry of anger, nor a call for attention, but a sound that carries memory and something older than words. That sound reaches a woman sitting alone, and in that moment, the boundary between the human world and the wild begins to blur. This is Howled into the Full Moon, a story of silence, connection, and the language that does not need to be spoken. For 3 days, the snow did not stop. The snow swallowed sound, and the wind blowing down from the mountains carried the scent of night even during the day. Cold, damp, and old. Riding that scent, the howl of a mother wolf drifted in, from far away, very low. It did not burst outward. It stayed in place like a breath left behind somewhere in the mountain. The sound carried no meaning she could name, yet it came from the same place each night. It did not move on. It did not fade. She was sitting in the living room, in the old chair her father had left behind. The wooden armrests remembered the shape of hands long gone, and the chair held her weight so precisely that she did not need to move at all. An open book lay across her knees. Sentences passed before her eyes, and between them, beyond the window, the snow gathered without a sound. The page and the snowfall seemed to share the same focus. The boundary between inside and outside was slowly beginning to blur. At the edge of her vision, something very small brushed past her right eye. It was too slight to be cleanly called a mistake. She lifted her head for a moment. Then, as if nothing had happened, she returned her gaze to the book. On days like this, the snow had a way of deceiving people. She turned a few more pages, but after some time had passed, this time was different. Something moved again within the snow. The movement was not hurried, nor did it lean toward escape. Rather than cutting through the snow, it looked like the choice of a body enduring within it, searching for direction. She did not close the book. To avoid making any sound, she rose from her chair very slowly. The faint friction of the chair felt unnaturally loud, the sound left behind after the snow had taken everything else. She walked to the window. Beyond the glass, the backyard was entirely white. Boundaries had vanished, and the distinction between tree, ground, and sky was dissolving into one another. There, at the far edge of the trees, something was parting the snow. Something, using the farthest edges of its body, was slowly cutting through the white, as if trying not to be seen. A brief flutter, a pause, then another. It was not the motion of wings, not a habitual movement. It was the way a living body searched for balance inside the snow. She stood with her hand pressed to the glass for a long while. The glass was cold. The cold lingered in her palm before slowly seeping into her body. The wolf's howl from the mountain no longer felt distant, like background. It remained unbroken, hanging low in the air. Outside, something continued to work its way through the snow. It did not stop. It did not disappear. She did not look away. The rhythm of the falling snow and the rhythm of the movement were beginning to slip out of alignment. And that quiet misalignment was turning this night into something different from all the others before it. The moment she opened the door, cold air pressed into the house, slow and deliberate, as though winter itself were stepping inside. Not merely weather, but something ancient and patient, something that moved with intention through the world. The snow was deeper than she had expected. 2 steps beyond the threshold, and it swallowed her ankles. By the third, it rose nearly to her knees, heavy and resistant, as if it did not want to be crossed. Each step forward required effort, a negotiation between her will and the white expanse that stretched before her, endless and indifferent. She moved carefully toward the backyard, her breath forming small clouds that dissolved almost instantly in the frigid air. There were already marks on the snow. Something had passed through here. But even as she watched, the falling flakes softened the lines, blurring track into suggestion, suggestion into memory, until their meaning disappeared entirely. It was as though the earth itself were erasing the story even as it unfolded. When she stepped closer to the trees, she saw it, a small body half buried in the snow, so light it seemed, pressed down by the weight of winter itself. So still, she could not tell whether it was breathing. In the dim gray light of the storm, it looked almost like a fallen branch, something the forest had discarded, until she saw the curve of its ear, the delicate architecture of bone beneath fur. A wolf cub. Its fur was soaked through, darkened by water and cold, clinging to the small frame beneath. One front paw lay bent at an angle no living limb should hold, trembling, just barely, with a motion so faint it might have been only the wind moving through the fur. The other 3 paws were tucked beneath its body, as though even in this state it was trying to preserve what little warmth remained. No sound came from its mouth, only a thin breath, like a faint cloud of steam, rising and vanishing, each cycle slower than the last. She stood there. For a moment, she did nothing at all. Whether she should step forward or turn away, the thought did not finish forming. Her mind offered reasons: the danger of wild animals, the futility of intervention, the natural order of things. But her body answered first, moving before reason could construct its careful arguments. When she knelt, the cold pushed through her clothes, seeping inward with deliberate patience, settling into her bones. She brushed the snow away with both hands, her fingers already numbing, and lifted the small body carefully, as though it might break if handled too quickly. The cub's ribs pressed against her palms, each one distinct beneath the wet fur. It was much lighter than she expected. Not the weight of something fully alive, but closer to the weight of warmth that had not yet left, the last traces of a fire before it goes dark, the weight of possibility suspended between presence and absence. The cub shuddered once in her arms, a sudden, fragile motion that traveled through its entire body, and then went still again. Its head lolled against her chest, and she could feel the faint percussion of its heartbeat, irregular, uncertain, but there. She turned back towards the house. The snow continued to fall, thick and relentless, erasing the world step by step. Her footprints faded after only a few steps, as if she had never been there at all. The forest watched in silence, the dark pines standing like witnesses to something that had happened countless times before, and would happen countless times again. When she stepped inside, the sound of the door closing echoed louder than it should have, final and irreversible. She laid the cub near the hearth, on the worn rug that still held the warmth of earlier fires. She draped her coat over its body, tucking the edges around the small form. She added wood to the fire, dry oak that caught quickly, then used a cloth dampened with water to gently wipe the snow from its fur, working slowly, methodically, as though the rhythm of care itself might call the creature back. The cub made no sound. It only breathed, slowly, unevenly, as though each breath had to be remembered, as though the act of drawing air had become something that required concentration and will. She sat beside it and did not move for a long time, watching the small chest rise and fall, counting the seconds between each breath. Then, between the soft crackle of the fire, she heard it again. The cry. This time, it was closer. Not a sound coming down from the mountain, but one cutting through wind and snow, moving toward the house with unmistakable direction. It was a sound that belonged to no human throat, that carried in it all the weight of loss and searching, of instinct more powerful than fear. Long, low, without end. A mother calling for what had been taken. She did not lift her head. She did not reach for the door. She did not look toward the windows where the darkness pressed against the glass. She listened. The cry came again, and this time it seemed to circle the house, probing, questioning. The wolf was close now, perhaps at the edge of the clearing, perhaps even nearer. The sound filled the night, patient and implacable, a voice that would not stop until it received an answer or could no longer make the sound. Outside, the snow kept falling, layer upon layer, building the world anew in white silence. Somewhere in the mountains, or perhaps no longer in the mountains at all, the mother wolf was calling into the dark in a language older than words, older than names, older than the boundaries humans drew between their world and the wild. And that cry did not stop for the rest of the night. It wove through the hours like a thread, sometimes distant, sometimes so close it seemed to vibrate in the walls themselves. It spoke of things that had no translation. The scent of a cub carried on human hands, the violation of an invisible line, the mathematics of survival that allowed no room for mercy or hesitation. The fire burned low, then lower. The cub's breathing continued, shallow but steady. And the woman sat in the darkness between the hearth and the door, bearing witness to both the life she had carried inside and the one she had left outside, understanding, perhaps for the first time, that there were some choices that could not be unmade, some doors that once opened could never be fully closed again. The night stretched on. The cry continued, and in that sound was everything that could not be said. Grief and rage and a love so fierce it could tear through winter itself, could outlast cold and darkness and the cruel indifference of a world that took and never asked permission. Dawn, when it finally came, arrived without announcement, just a gradual graying of the darkness, the snow still falling, the world still held in winter's grip. The crying had stopped. The silence that replaced it was somehow louder. The snow ceased, then returned once more. There were days when it descended in thick, silent torrents, and days when it wandered down like a half-forgotten thought, barely touching the earth before dissolving into absence. She had stopped counting time. Morning and evening were measured only by the rise and fall of flames in the hearth, and the world beyond her walls existed as nothing more than a pale, unbroken whiteness framed by the window. The cub, slowly, impossibly, came back to life. At first, there was only breath, shallow, uncertain, like the first stirring of spring beneath frozen ground. Then came trembling. After several days, its eyes opened, just for a heartbeat, as if testing whether the world was still there, before closing once again. She did not speak to it. She did not grant it a name. She only warmed water over the fire, shared what meager food remained, and replaced the worn coat draped across its small, broken body. The snow fell again, this time softer than memory. That evening, she had dimmed the lamps in the living room and stood quietly beside the window. The snow was falling so gently it made no sound at all, and the world held itself still, as though the night itself were listening. Then, in the darkness beyond the glass, something moved. This time, there was no mistaking it. Footprints marked the snow, trailing deliberately toward the house, and at their end, a single shadow waited. The mother wolf. Her body was low to the ground, her eyes no longer burning with wildness. This was not the stance of threat, nor of uncertainty. It was something far older, something that predated words. She held her breath and placed her hand flat against the cold glass. Through the thin barrier of the window, their eyes met for the first time. The wolf did not howl. She did not advance nor retreat. She simply stood there, gazing into the house, into the warmth, into the light. She did not step back. She did not pull the curtains closed. She did not let the fire die. The glow from the hearth passed through the glass like a whisper and touched the wolf's weathered face. In that moment, no words were necessary. The wolf lowered her head once, a gesture both solemn and understood, then slowly turned away. She stepped back, one measured pace at a time. The tracks she left behind in the snow were soon swallowed by the falling white. That night, the wolf did not howl, but she knew, from this night forward, neither of them would face the darkness alone. The glass between worlds. The village's stories always fell more slowly than the snow, drifting down in whispers, settling in layers, accumulating weight with each retelling until they became something solid enough to bury a person beneath. At first, no one gave it a name. There were only remarks passed between neighbors at the well, murmured over steaming cups in dim kitchens. Observations that hung in the air like breath made visible by cold. The barn door swinging open on its hinges, though no hand had touched it. A chicken vanished from its roost without so much as a feather left behind. And in the blue-shadowed morning, footprints pressed deep into fresh snow, their pattern neither fully beast nor imagination. People blamed the winter, as people always do when the world becomes strange. In a season like this, they said, shaking their heads, anything could happen. The cold makes animals bold. The dark plays tricks on the eyes. By spring, everything returns to sense. But after a few days, the scattered words began to find one another, drawn together like iron filings to a magnet, forming shapes, gaining momentum. They say wolves have come down from the high country. Haven't you heard the howling at night? Like grief, like hunger. That house by the mountain? The lights never go out. She's keepin' vigil for something. Her name was never spoken aloud, not out of kindness, but because naming gives power, and in silence, suspicion grows more potent. Yet whenever the conversation faltered and stopped, whenever someone's sentence trailed into nothing, the direction of their gaze was always the same, toward the house that stood where the forest began to swallow the village's edge, where smoke rose thin and constant from a single chimney. She knew it, of course. The distance she felt when she stepped outside was not merely physical, but atmospheric, a pressure change, a cooling. The silence that settled behind her after words were finished, after greetings were exchanged, and faces turned away, told her everything she needed to know. She had become a space around which the village's life flowed, careful not to touch, not to be touched. Still, she explained nothing. There was nothing to explain that would satisfy them, nothing that would translate across the gulf between what she knew and what they feared. Inside the house, beyond their speculation and suspicion, a small breath was becoming clearer, more defined with each passing day. The cub could now lift its body on its own, rising on trembling legs that grew stronger each time they bore weight. It could crawl away from the hearth's warmth and into the center of the room, exploring the boundaries of its small world with increasing courage. It could not yet walk with any grace, but the direction of its will, to live, to grow, to become, was unmistakable in every movement, every soft sound it made. She fed it with careful hands, watched over it through the long nights, learned the language of its needs. The snow fell again that week, not the light, dancing snow of early winter, but the deep, relentless snow that buries roads and seals houses, that transforms the familiar world into something ancient and unknowable. That night, she sat awake in the living room, her vigil long since become habit. The fire had burned low, reduced to embers that pulsed like a slow heartbeat in the darkness. Outside the window, night pressed against the glass with an almost physical weight, thick and absolute, until almost nothing could be distinguished. Not tree from shadow, not earth from sky. Then, from beyond the glass, she sensed a movement, very slight, barely more than an intuition, the way prey knows the predator before sight confirms it. She raised her head slowly, her body suddenly alert. Just outside the window, limned by the faint glow from the dying fire, standing on snow that glowed with its own peculiar luminescence under a hidden moon, stood two shadows given form. Mother and cub, not the one she had sheltered, but the others, the ones left behind. The cub, still unsteady on legs not yet grown into their purpose, pressed close against the mother's leg, seeking warmth, seeking courage. The mother stood low, her body lowered not in submission, but in careful assessment, her head level with the window, looking directly into the house with eyes that caught and held the firelight, transforming it into something wild and knowing. There was no cry, no territorial howl, no sound at all beyond the whisper of snow settling. They simply stood there, together, breathing visible clouds into the frozen air. She did not rise from her chair, did not reach for the door or make any movement that might shatter this fragile moment. At the same height as the window, she looked back at them, meeting the mother's gaze without flinching, without turning away. Two worlds faced one another, with only a single pane of glass between them, that thin membrane between wild and tame, between one kind of love and another, between the life that hunts and the life that shelters. The mother's eyes did not ask for anything, did not beg or demand. They were not human eyes, did not carry human emotions. But in her gaze remained the reason she could not leave, could not abandon this place, the knowledge that one of her own was inside, beyond her reach, beyond her ability to reclaim or protect. The smaller cub, the one from outside, lifted its head briefly, drawn by some instinct toward the light, the warmth, the shadows cast by the fire. It looked inside with eyes barely open, seeing perhaps only shapes, only the vague outline of a world it would never enter, would never understand. Its gaze found the unmoving shape of a human being and lingered there, curious, innocent, unafraid. In that moment, watching them watch her, she understood with sudden clarity. This was not a visit, not an accident, not even a search. This was confirmation. The mother had come to see, to know, to verify with her own eyes that her lost cub still lived, still breathed, still existed somewhere in the world, even if that place was unreachable. She was not here to take. She was here to witness. The snow fell quietly between them, each flake a small baptism, covering the footprints that had brought them here, already beginning to erase the evidence of this encounter. The village's rumors, growing bolder and more elaborate with each passing day, could not reach this house in this moment. Their words held no power here in this space between glass and snow, between one mother and another. That night, no one opened a door. No one turned away. No one broke the spell of mutual recognition. Yet the time of understanding was clearly flowing there, patient as a river beneath ice, undeniable as spring, in the space between the glass, in the meeting of eyes that spoke a language older than words, in the silent acknowledgement that love, in all its forms, knows no boundary it will not stand at the edge of, waiting, watching, hoping against hope. After that day, after the night of mutual witness and silent understanding, the mother wolf no longer lingered by the window like a supplicant at a shrine. She still appeared, a shadow among shadows, a shape that materialized from the tree line with the regularity of tide or season. But she did not look toward the house as she once had, with that intensity of longing and loss that had made the air itself seem to thicken between them. Her body remained angled in its direction, held by some invisible thread of connection, yet her gaze drifted often now, pulled by a different gravity, back into the forest, toward the deep places where humans did not venture, where the old world still held dominion. She stayed for less time with each appearance, a few breaths worth of presence, a few glances, no longer searching, only acknowledging. Then she turned away, quietly. Her departure was as soundless as her arrival, leaving only the faint impression of paws in snow, marks that would soon be filled and forgotten. She noticed the change. The woman in the house, the keeper of the lost cub. She could not have explained it in words. She could not have given voice to the intuition that moved through her like a current beneath ice. But something fundamental had shifted in the unspoken dialogue between them. When she stood at the window now, wrapped in wool against the cold that seeped through every crack, the tension that once lingered inside the house, that taut string of possibility and fear, no longer held. It was being pulled outward, drawn like water toward a drain, toward the trees that stood dark and patient at the world's edge. The dynamic had reversed. She was no longer being watched. She was being called. The snow began to fall again, not lightly, not playfully, not the kind children caught on their tongues before laughter erased it. This snow lasted beyond a day, through the night, through the following day, without pause, without mercy. The flakes were not large. They did not inspire wonder. They layered upon one another with patient malevolence, slowly sealing the breath of the earth. Sound vanished, boundaries dissolved. The familiar landscape became something older, hostile. The world contracted. The sky pressed down. The walls between inside and outside grew thin. The village was the last to recognize the change, as communities often are. At first, they bolted the barn doors more tightly. They checked the latches twice, 3 times. They pressed shoulders against wood to test its strength. Then they stopped extinguishing the lamps at night, letting precious oil burn through the dark hours, preferring waste to the vulnerability of darkness. After that, people began to move in pairs, even for short distances, to the well, to a neighbor's door across the square. Their eyes scanned the tree line with the hunted alertness of prey animals. This isn't something we can leave alone any longer. The snow's too deep. They're getting desperate. The wolves will come farther down. They always do when they're starving. The words grew shorter, clipped by cold, by fear. The voices dropped lower, as though volume itself might summon what they dreaded. No one spoke a name aloud, not hers, not the wolves', as though silence could provide protection, as though what wasn't named could not harm them. But everyone knew. Everyone felt the pull of the same direction, the same magnetic north of their unease. Her house, the place where the forest began to swallow the village, the threshold between their world and the other. That evening, As gray light dimmed toward darkness and the snow continued its relentless accumulation, she was not standing at the window in her customary vigil. She had put on her coat, the heavy one, lined with rabbit fur, reserved for true cold. She stood by the door, her hand already reaching for the latch. Her breath came measured, deliberate, the breathing of someone preparing for exertion, for commitment, for an irreversible path. Behind her, inside the warmth she was about to leave, a small breath rose and fell in sleep. Innocent, trusting. The fire in the hearth burned weaker than usual, its flames subdued, as though it too sensed that something was concluding. She had not fed it, she had not stoked it. Some part of her had already decided before her mind understood. Outside, visible through the small window set into the door, the mother wolf appeared again. Punctual, like an appointment kept. This time, she did not look at the window. She did not acknowledge the house. She faced the forest, her entire body oriented toward it like a compass needle finding true north. Her gaze lingered there in the gathering darkness, unmoving, focused with an intensity that transcended attention, as though something unfinished, something vital, still remained among the trees. As though the forest itself were speaking in a language older than words, and she was listening. The woman watched from behind the door. Her hand tightened on the handle until her knuckles whitened. Her breath fogged the glass. From far away, filtering through snow that muffled and distorted all sound, she heard footsteps, not close, not yet, but approaching, multiple sets, moving in rough unison. The village, finally mobilized, finally coming to do what they had convinced themselves must be done. The mother wolf turned her head once, very briefly, with the economy of movement that comes from certainty. She looked directly at her, not at the house, not at the window, at her, as though wood and glass were transparent, as though intention were visible. Their eyes met. Then the wolf turned back toward the forest, her message delivered without sound. In that moment, not through intuition, not through feeling, but with the clarity of revelation, she understood the truth that had been building beneath every encounter. This was not a visit. This had never been a visit. It was a summons, an invitation, a call to choose. The snow continued to fall, indifferent, persistent, each flake a small erasure. The village's unease, their fear, their anger, their resolve, was no longer a matter of words. It was movement, bodies in motion, men with torches, coming through the drifts toward her door. Behind her, the small breath continued its innocent rhythm. Before her, the forest waited. Between them, she stood at the threshold. Literally, metaphorically, her hand on the door, her heart making its final calculations, weighing what could be saved against what must be surrendered, measuring love against survival, counting the cost of every possible choice. The mother wolf did not look back again. She did not need to. She had already asked her question. She was simply waiting for the answer. The snow fell. The footsteps grew louder. The moment stretched, thin as a blade's edge. The last second before everything changes. the final heartbeat before a decision that cannot be unmade. The door was still closed. Her hand was already turning the handle. She opened the door. The wind struck her face. The snow had risen past her ankles. Behind her, no voice, no hand. The mother wolf turned toward the forest and moved ahead. She did not fasten her coat. The door closed. The sound disappeared into the snow. Once inside the forest, the world narrowed. Trees leaned under their burden, pressed against one another. Footprints filled before she could take the next step. The mother moved ahead, stopped, moved again. She did not look back. The slope changed. The mother changed direction. A place where the wind could not reach fully. A large tree, hollowed. Inside, the snow had not settled completely. The mother stopped, stepped closer. The smell came first. Cold, not of winter, but of something else. Inside the hollow, on shadowed snow, a small body, still. Snow had covered it evenly. The fur beneath no longer moved. Beside it, another, breathing. So shallow it was nearly the same as not breathing. Ribs visible through matted fur. Eyes that could not open, only trembling. The mother stood, looked. She knelt. Snow soaked through her clothes. When she gathered the living body into her arms, its warmth was so faint it felt like the edge of something already gone. She did not speak. The wind passed between the trees. The snow grew heavier. The mother wolf stepped back. She did not look at the one that had stopped. Holding the one that had not, she left. Behind her, the mother did not follow. The forest released one breath, long, deep, through branches and bark and the hollow places where sound goes to empty itself. And the snow fell on what remained, on what had been left, covering until there was only white, only the shape of absence where something small had been. She walked back through the trees, each step heavier than the one before. The body in her arms barely stirred. She did not think of the village, of the voices that would be waiting, of the feet that had been moving toward her house. She thought only of warmth, of breath, of the small space between now and too late. The mother wolf had already disappeared into the deeper forest, into the parts where no human path could follow. She did not call after her. She did not turn to see if she was still there. Some things end without sound. The hollow tree stood. The snow continued, and between the living and what was no longer, the distance was only a few hours, only a choice made or not made, only the difference between leaving the door closed and opening it. She held the small body closer, felt the faint heartbeat against her own. The forest behind her grew darker. Ahead, somewhere through the white, the house waited. Door still open, fire still burning low, another small breath still rising and falling in the warmth she had left behind. Two now, instead of one. The snow erased her footprints as she walked. By morning, there would be no trace of this path, no evidence of what had been carried from cold into warmth, from forest into fire. Only the hollow tree would remember, holding its small stillness through the long winter, through the snow that would not stop falling until spring came to melt what had been buried, to reveal what had been hidden, to return what had always belonged to the earth. She turned back with the wolf cub held tight against her chest. Her body felt heavier than she had expected. Not because of the cub. Its weight was nothing, almost less than nothing, but because it felt as though she were carrying time itself, the accumulated weight of every moment that had led to this one, every choice made or not made, folding into her limbs like stones sewn into cloth. The snow had already risen past her knees, each step now a small excavation, and the footprints she had followed moments before, the path that had brought her here, were completely gone, erased as though they had never existed, as though the forest were closing behind her the way water closes over a stone. She did not hurry. She knew she could not run, not through this depth, not carrying what she carried. One step, then another, her breath coming harder now, visible in the air. Each exhale a small ghost that disappeared into white. The cub's breath moved faintly within her arms, so slight she could not be certain whether she heard it or merely felt it. A tremor more than a sound, life reduced to its thinnest thread, barely there, barely holding. As she neared the edge of the forest, where the trees began to thin and the village would become visible again through the veil of falling snow, the air changed. Below her, far below where the village should have been, there was a sound she did not notice disappearing until it was gone. Human sound, voices, metal striking metal, the dull rhythm of work and movement, all of it swallowed at once, as if the world below had been quietly erased before the mountain made its choice. Pressure dropped, temperature shifted. Something fundamental in the atmosphere rearranged itself. Sound came first, very low, from far away, or perhaps from everywhere at once, sourceless, direction impossible to determine. A dull reverberation, a frequency felt in bone rather than heard, as though the mountain itself were pausing to draw breath, gathering itself, preparing. She stopped. Her body understood before her mind did. The snow beneath her feet felt wrong, not unstable, but overfilled, as if it had already decided to move and was only waiting to be released. Then came the vibration, not from the ground beneath her feet, but through the air itself, transmitted through snow and space, as if the world were trembling, as if something vast and ancient had begun to move. And then the sound collapsed. It was not the sound of falling snow, not wind through branches, not any natural silence filling in. Something enormous, something that had been held in place by tension and cold, was moving all at once, surrendering to gravity, breaking free. She pulled the cub closer to her body, instinct overriding thought. There was no time to turn, no time to see, no time to understand what was coming. The mountain opened. The snow did not slide gradually, did not cascade or tumble or drift. It poured, like a wall collapsing, like flesh torn, like the mountain shedding its skin. Faster than sound could warn, faster than thought could follow. By instinct alone, the body's ancient wisdom that precedes consciousness, she twisted toward the nearest trees, pressing the cub into her chest, curling around it, bowing her back over it, making of herself a shell, a shelter, the last barrier between fragile life and what was coming. The world was no longer white. It became the color of nothing at all. Impact, weight beyond comprehension, pressure that drove breath from lungs, cold that seared like heat. Sound vanished, swallowed by the roar of displacement. Direction vanished, up and down, becoming meaningless. Even time was severed, cut loose from its mooring, so that seconds stretched or compressed, or simply ceased to be measured at all. She did not know how long it passed, could not have said whether it was moments or hours, whether the world had stopped or she had simply left it. When she opened her eyes, and she could not remember closing them, it took her a long while to realize that she was still breathing, that breath was still possible, that there was still air and lungs to hold it. Snow had settled heavily over her body, a weight that pinned her, that made movement something to be considered carefully, attempted slowly. And within her arms, pressed against her chest in the small pocket of air she had managed to preserve, a trace of warmth, barely there, barely distinguishable from the memory of warmth, but still there. She did not move. She could not move yet. The snow held her. The mountain pressed down, and her body needed time to remember how its parts connected, how they might work together to do something as complex as rising. From far away, very far away, or perhaps closer than she thought, but muffled by layers of snow and the strange acoustics of burial. A single sound reached her. This time it was not a warning. It was not a call, not a summons, not an invitation. It was simply a cry that had arrived too late, that knew itself to be too late, that understood what had been lost and what could not be recovered. Long, low, a howl that seemed to scrape across the entire mountain, to echo from ridge to ridge, to fill every hollow space with the sound of something breaking that could never be mended. Listening to it, lying still beneath snow, holding what she held, feeling the faint warmth that might or might not endure, she closed her eyes. And in that moment, the story crossed completely into a place from which it could never return, where the before and after were separated by a line as absolute as the one between breathing and not breathing, where what had been possible became impossible, and what had been whole could only ever be fragments. The howl continued, then faded, then stopped. The silence that followed was different from any silence before it, heavier, more final, the silence of doors closing, of paths ending, of the world rearranging itself around an absence that would never be filled. She lay still. The cub's heartbeat, if it was still beating, was too faint to feel. Above her, snow continued to fall onto snow, adding to what had already fallen, covering what the avalanche had left, smoothing everything into one white surface that held no memory of what lay beneath. The forest stood silent, the mountain settled, and somewhere in the village below, too far away to matter now, too distant to reach or be reached, voices called out, searching for what they would not find, calling names into wind and snow, believing still that calling might bring back what had already gone beyond the reach of any voice, any plea, any human desire to undo what had been done. The snow no longer moved. The mountain seemed to have stopped, holding its breath. Even the wind had grown quiet, as if it had lost its way. There was no sound, no cracking ice, no settling branches, no sense of direction, no up or down. She opened her eyes. The weight pressing down on her body was still there, real and heavy, but she was not completely buried. A thick tree, old and unmoving, had twisted the flow of the avalanche, split it like water around stone, leaving a pocket of space where she lay. In her arms, pressed against her chest, a small breath, very faint, reached her. Only then did she look down at the cub. Snow and ice clung to its fur, weighing the small body down, but the ribs still moved. The breathing had not stopped. Until then, she had moved without thinking. No fear, no pain. Only one thing mattered, not letting go. She dug through the snow with numb hands, pushed against its weight, moved forward inch by inch, step by painful step, without knowing how much time had passed. Minutes or hours. It no longer mattered. When she reached the center of the village, she stopped. The houses were buried, paths erased. What had not been buried had been pushed aside. Walls broken at their base, doors torn from hinges. Not destruction, displacement, as though something vast had simply passed through once and left nothing where people had been. No smoke, no voices, no movement anywhere. The only trace left of people was the full moon. Even that had been erased, swallowed whole, as if something vast had passed through once and the world had stopped breathing. That was when she understood that she was alone. Her legs gave way. She collapsed into the snow. Fear arrived all at once, not slowly, not gently. It struck her body like a wave, stealing the strength from her limbs. Her hands began to shake, then her shoulders, then her breath, and then tears came. She had not cried before. Not when the mountain broke open, not when she pulled herself free, not when she carried the cub through the snow. But now, holding the small body against her, she cried, and cried again. The sounds surprised her, coming from deep in her chest, raw and unshaped. If she had been able to speak, perhaps more breath could have been saved. The cub stirred slightly, still breathing, still warm. That night, she did not light a fire. There was no strength left for it. Instead, she sat against a half-buried wall, wrapped what remained of her coat around the two cubs, one barely warm, one still trying to become it, and stayed there. Under the moonlight, cold, clear, and full, she heard the mother wolf's howl. It came from high on the mountain, from where the trees thinned and stone took over. Long, low, unbroken. No words were exchanged, no understanding spoken aloud. But as she felt the cub's breath rise and fall against her chest, she knew. You saved me. She did not say it, did not whisper it into the dark, did not offer it to the wind or the mountain or the moon. She only held what remained closer. The small breaths grew steadier, rhythmic, alive. That was enough. The howl faded. She remained where she was, holding the cub, listening to its breath rise and fall against her chest. The moon crossed the sky. The snow held still. And that night, with nothing more happening, they stayed there. together, and that fact alone made everything more cruel.